is the preeminent American labor economist. He's the Herbert Ascherman Chair in Economics at Harvard University. He runs the labor economics side of the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's a distinguished fellow. He's a much published author. Just looking at this list of books, it makes me want to say what we often said about Senator Moynihan, that he's written more books than most of us have read, translated into a number of languages. He really is the dean of American labor economists and has some very interesting things to say that will grow out of America Works, a new book which I encourage all of you to buy outside. We've made them available. And I was telling him earlier that he is both even-handed in his treatment, but also meets the Harry Truman test. You may remember that Truman got tired to death of his economic advisors coming in saying, well, Mr. President, on the one hand, interest rates may go up, but on the other hand, they might just go down. And Truman said, what I needed is a good one-handed economist. And one of the joys of this book is that Professor Freeman has some one-handed comments that really sum up where the profession is and where it feels it really knows something. And he winds it all up with 9 proposals for action. So he is very much meeting the Woodrow Wilson test as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks. We managed to rescue something went wrong with this Sony machine. And I would say we have a good IBM machine, but it's really Lenovo machine at this point. Okay, and what I'll do is run you through a little bit about this book, and then come to some policy things. And you actually will see. He didn't realize it. You will see the hand. So this is a book that was written to be non-technical, but evidence-based, and with extraordinary number of footnotes, if you'll notice. The reason was I kept thinking of some of my conservative friends who I know would disagree with the various things I said. So I wanted them, if they were going to be critical, there would be a footnote that would refer to the, whatever it is that I thought would diffuse them, so they have to accept at least what it is. Well, there's the hand that you referred to. And this is what is exceptional about the U.S. compared to the other countries. We put great emphasis on this invisible hand. And let me just say that you'll notice, you can see it, most of the people on the right believe there is only a right hand of markets. And that's not true. The economists believe in supply and demand, 2 scissors. There's 2 hands there. But the U.S. does put greater stress on the market and less on institutions and regulations than other countries. That distinguishes us to an extraordinary extent. This is just to show you some measures. The book has these things. And what I do is here I just put the various measures. Fraser Institute is a Canadian think tank that's very conservative, and every year they put out the economic freedom of the world. And they have recently done labor. So they built up a labor sub-index. So this is basically the economic freedom in the labor market. And a high number here reflects that you're more free market oriented. And so these are all the OECD countries, each point, and the government is done the same way. And there's the U.S. is number 1 in their rating by these 2 things. And then I just gave some other numbers here, which actually reverses them. Now the U.S. will be, it reverses the direction. Collective bargaining coverage, the U.S. is the lowest. And social expenditures as share GDP, the U.S. is the 2nd lowest, because Japan doesn't spend that much either. And you see, we're just far away from all the other countries. So that's the empirics of where we stand on this. So does this work? I mean, does this produce the greatest economy? Dot 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 dot. If I give you the ballyhoo stuff, and we have been very successful. This is the one hand, and the other hand, we've been really successful. We have a better employment record. We work more hours than Europeans, or now more hours than the Japanese. So the only guys among the sort of successful market economies that work more hours than us are the Koreans. And the Koreans are rapidly reducing their hours worked with some government policies pushing so that people have more holidays and so on. So you could treat the hours worked, that's a great success. We put in lots of hours, we can keep working, or you could say, well, gee, we don't have vacations. We've had rapid productivity. I think we've been very good in responding to economic changes. We've absorbed huge numbers of immigrants into the country, and that's obviously created some disagreements nowadays. And then we've done a better job than almost every other country in opening opportunities for women. So all of that's very successful. And then I'd show you something which is, when I did this, it really surprised me. Because we know China is growing much more rapidly than the US. China's really catching up in a relative sense. And then I looked at, okay, China's growing at about 8.9% here. We grow at 1.9%. This is GDP per capita. And then look at the absolute numbers. We were so much wealthier than China that even though they are growing at 4 times our rate of growth, the absolute gap between the US and China actually widened. That gives a sense of where we stay. We can go for many more years where China will grow much more rapidly than us. The absolute gap between the two societies will actually widen because it's just such a higher starting level.
It's not per capita income. What are those numbers?
Absolute, it's purchasing power parity. But those, yeah, it's per capita. Per capita GDP in purchasing power parity, meaning adjusted for the price.
Meaning China has over half of the new standard?
No, that's the change. I'm sorry. No, good gracious. Yeah, no, it's the change. So what I wanted to show you is we were so much higher per capita income that even though they're growing faster than us, the absolute dollar change. That's the point of it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. So in that sense, again, it says, gee, the US looks pretty good. And this is the success in the employment rate. And it's us versus advanced Europe. And one of the things that really bothers the Europeans is that in the 70s, they had a lower unemployment rate than we did, with all the European institutions that less market-oriented. And now, this was 2005, they had a higher unemployment rate. They still do have a higher unemployment rate than we do. And there's the employment population rate, which the reason why we have such a high employment population rate is because we really have a lot of use of women in the employment. And there's the hours worked things. We were about the same as Europe in 1970, and now they have reduced their hours worked through a lot more vacation and part-time work. We don't. So generally most economists look at this and say, this is real successful. We're running a really hard driving economy, and I think that's correct. Because you worry a little bit about the hours worked and the lack of vacation things, but it's very successful. And then I have the skeletons in the closet for us. This is the most unequal economy in the world, in the advanced world, not the world. You'll see in a minute, we look like a not very good third world country in terms of our income distribution. The productivity growth has gone largely to the highest paid. And then we have the lack of either our union movement is very weak, so workers don't have a voice in the workplace. And we've got nothing else that we offer people. So it isn't like we have a substitute out there where we say, here's something like a union and you have this. We have nothing. The inequality, I do the same kind of thing. Here I've got a 90-10 ratio. It's the ratio of the 90th to the 90th percentile of 10. And there I compare it with the Gini coefficient. The 90-10 is the labor market. The Gini coefficient is for just another metric of inequality. And you see the U.S. There we are. We're way out. These are again all the advanced countries. And I show you some of the poor and the rich there. Then I looked at the U.S. Took from the C. This was the deal with my conservative friends in particular. This is the CIA data. But they do a wonderful job, the World Factbook, and very straight economic figures and so on. And I didn't realize the U.S. and China have about the same inequality. And we are 84th in the world in terms of, so we're closer to the poor, to the most unequal country in the world. This is ranking it by, number one would be like Norway or Sweden, I forgot which of those countries. So we are closer to the most unequal third world country than we are to the advanced European countries. And the fact that we're like China is and we have a higher inequality according to these figures than India. I'm a little dubious of that, but that's what the CIA numbers said. So, I think Brazil is more unequal than we are among the major countries. So, and then there's some figures over here which I also found, wow. These are standard deviations of log earnings. They're just a measure of how much variation there is among workers. So for the U.S., it's all workers. So don't worry about what the particular metrics are, but just it's measuring inequality. 0.86 was the number. So let's take Americans who score exactly the same on a literacy test, it's like an SAT or whatever it means. And exactly the same, I think in the book it says, within 5 points. I mean, it's not, it's very narrowly bound. So inequality goes down to the U.S. from 8.6 to 7.9. Germany, all workers. Everybody. So you're comparing now Americans who had exactly the same score. So we've measurably, at least on one metric, similar abilities or skills or whatever it is, compared to everybody in Germany, everybody in the Netherlands, and everybody in Sweden. And so the inequality in the U.S., it's unbelievable. You could take people from Harvard, and the inequality among the class at Harvard would probably, in their earnings, would probably exceed that in Sweden, Germany, or the Netherlands. I mean, that's the level of disparity that we have in the country. One thing I learned talking to business people about is they don't like inequality somehow has a negative, leftist connotations. They use the word disparity, and they say, okay, now we understand. Business folks, this is disparity. But here I see standard deviation. That's for the economists. Maybe some of my right-wing economist friends might not even like the word disparity, but this is technical, standard deviation. And it is bigger. And so this country is just incredibly wide distribution of earnings. This is a great failure. We're the most unequal of all the societies. We're the same as China. Just as a footnote, one of the reasons the Chinese government is now starting to encourage, just passed the new labor law, encourage unions, is because they're hoping to rein in some of the inequality in China before possibly there'll be some major social protests. So this is a clear failure in my view of our country. Now here, we've had this great productivity growth, and what I do here is I take the productivity growth and I give you, that's the high thing with the triangles, and I then give you some figures for various measures of earnings. And there's different earnings measures that they're reported there, where they came from, and so on. And what you notice is none of the earnings measures grow as much as the productivity has grown. So the place where they start means I think it's 73 probably. That's usually, yeah. So 73 is the period, and prior to the 73, they were all growing sort of similarly, and now the productivity grows and the earnings do not grow as much. The one that is the closest to the productivity is a full-time compensation measure that includes all the medical care and costs like that have gone up. And that includes white-collar and blue-collar people, and that includes some high-level earners, though not all. And the one that's the bottom one is the one that historically labor economists had always used. It's the average earnings of production workers, which includes 80% of the U.S. workforce. So that's the one that's most people in the economy. Leaves out the white-collar people, leaves out some people. So we've had great productivity growth. This is part of the inequality thing. It hasn't gone to the right. It hasn't gone to all the people. Right enough. So then I said, well, maybe we need a union. But this isn't my statement. This is a statement from the American workers. And one of the stunning things that has happened in recent years, the blue line are the workers, non-union workers, who say they would vote for a union today if it was offered. Traditionally, one looked at the numbers, it was 30 to 40%. And you said, well, that's pretty big. 30 to 40% of people are not having a union who want one. And then suddenly it rose above 50%. And the groups against the unions are over there. Basically the 2000s, or it's beginning in 2000, I think it's 1 or 2 reading this, it's been above 50%. It's been around 50%. It's just stunning to me, at least. Because I was traditionally in the business of saying, oh, it's about a third, and that's what everybody would say, a third of 40%, whatever it is. And I did a survey when the Clinton administration was in, and we did a survey to try to understand what workers want. It was done privately, not government thing, no politics, and so on. And it came out to 30 to 40%, and we thought, oh, that's a lot of people who don't get a union. Now it's above 50%, and you might say, you don't believe that. Some business guys I've talked to say, nah, it's not true. They're just talking through their hat. Well, you can make that's within the realm possible, but it doesn't. People aren't saying they want a union unless they feel there's something going wrong in the economy. Maybe they want something else if you offer them something else, but they're not happy with this. And we've had inadvertently, the AFL-CIO has actually done a test of this, and much to their surprise, I can say, because when they did this test, they sent me an email that came from John Hyatt saying, I can't believe this silly survey stuff that you've been selling. It's true. They have this Working America that will have this fall 2 million people. And it's the fastest growing, quote, union, or put it in quotes, in the history of this country. But they've just gone door to door in various parts of the country and have asked people to join an organization to help workers. And they say it's an affiliate, I think, of the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO is not known as a good organization, to be clear. My survey things, if you say you want to join an organization of workers to work for workers' rights, people say yes. You then say a union, it goes down. You then say an AFL-CIO union, and you peeled off another 10% of the group. So the fact that they're going door to door and they're trying people sign up. Now this is signing up for an organization. The AFL-CIO, I think it's fair to say, are not quite sure what to do with these people. They didn't know this was going to happen. And my view is they could have 10 million people in the next 3 or 4 years if they wanted to. All the survey data just tells you this, and now their experience. But of course, they better know what they're going to do with these people, because they can't deliver traditional union things for them. But the American workers or people, they see the inequality, that there's been great growth in the country, I think, and that, yeah, if you work hard, you can keep your family above water, but it's 2 earners working and no vacations and so on. And so you could, as business people, you could take this as just a malaise that they're showing for this.
This is done by AFL-CIO.
No. This is independent surveys.
By whom?
In the independent survey groups. No, the AFL-CIO has no connection particularly to this. And what you can do if you're in the book, you see, if you're a little uneasy, you say, okay, this is one survey, because economists have always been, economists, social science, always asked this question, this NLRB question: if the election was held, how would you vote? So it's historically done. I was sufficiently suspicious of this huge rise at the end. Gallup poll has asked your attitudes towards unions in general. Do you think unions are good or bad for the country or something? That always over half the people, 60% of the people would always say yes. I might not want a union, and I might be opposed to them, I'm a business person, but I certainly believe that that's part of the democratic tradition. Those numbers have gone up just the way these have. So you can look at other measures, and that the Gallup poll does every year, or I think it's every year pretty much. And so you see this is consistent. You're one level suspicious, not of the AFL-CIO, but particularly, but of any single survey or survey question. Could be no. So actually, I've gone through almost every survey question that exists that would cast light on this, and bang, yeah, workers are extremely concerned. Actually, if you ask the following question, it's a different one. If you ask, would you like this group of workers to meet with management and discuss the workplace issues? And it's not a union. Clearly, it's not a union. You get 75 to 80% of the people saying that's what they want. And if they compare that to the union, more of them want this other organization. So in that sense, there'll still be 30, 40, or some large fraction want unions. But I want to use this now simply as an indicator that we've had this great success on the one hand, and on the other hand, this inequality and there's a lot of problems that workers see. And if the only solution you offer them is a union, they say this. If you begin offering them other solutions, so many of them will say, "Oh, I want that kind of organization." We asked them at one point, "What about more labor laws?" No, they're much. This is part of America in the following sense. Part of the American exceptionalism is people want to do it themselves in their workplace. If you're in France, you go for the SMIC, raise the minimum wage, and that's a really powerful tool. But here, that's not what people are looking for. I think they're looking for something, of their own. Just as a footnote, while the unions have been declining, occupational groups, associations have been increasing. So more and more people are signing in for. They don't do collective bargaining for you. And that's the difference. The union is collective bargaining, and the union then goes into conflict with the employer. Most people don't want conflict with their employers, and so that creates a very uneasy situation. When you have an occupational group that is providing you with information, that's helping you with salary information, and there's an interesting question of what these occupational groups can do. The association of, I don't know, ophthalmologists or something, the association of this or that. More people are members of those organizations than of the trade unions. Yeah.
Richard, you're suggesting there might be differences in these attitudes by occupational groups. I'm wondering if that's true, and secondly,
yes,
whether there are differences by age as well.
Yes. Okay. Let me get and take the age one first because it's interesting. The young people want it more than the older people, and that's where this, I could say, the business critique, if you want to make of this, would be. But the young people, they haven't experienced unions, and there's an element of truth to that. But they want it is again a sign that, and of course we know the labor market has really squeezed younger people. That's who part of your losers are. The other group that in terms of demography, is blacks are very strong, and women tend to want more than that. These things. Among the occupational groups, it is the ones who clearly go for this, the union, the strong union, and so on. We actually, in my own survey, we break up into more depthful kinds of things. But my survey, the one I did with Joel Rogers, was done before this burst above 50%. It was in the world of 30, 40%. And I've actually found some of the business community guys that's sort of cute in one sense. They're citing my numbers because it's way lower than this and saying, well, that's the best study ever done. And, I like that. And I don't mind them doing that. But if they would then just go and say, well, if it was just that's 30 to 40%, these are private sector workers. We're 7%. So if the business community were to sit down and say, well, 30 to 40%, why we ought to think of some solutions. They're not going to think of a union solution. But if they began thinking creatively of other ways of doing things, that would, and I was just speaking to business people 2 days ago at Harvard about this, and just please, Chamber of Commerce, please guys, come on, be creative. Or we know we're against this. They haven't kind of focused their minds on that this is a real problem. The occupation groups, it's the lower paid. That's the groups. Because then I have here the guys who don't need the unions, and they're not looking for trade unions. And the CEOs don't need a trade union at all. Some of these words, they look very left wing. The great CEO pay heist, perfect payday, and so on. They're taken from like Business Week, the Fortune. It is amazing when you go to the business press, some of their attitudes towards what's gone on in the executive pay. The executives did then the footnotes 1, 2, 3, 4. They're to show. They give you the reference. These are not in the book. I have this funny way of thinking. This is give the things I say. Must be Mother Jones or some socialist worker parties like. And then no, it's Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, and the one in the middle I think comes from. It's TV, and I think it's public broadcasting, but it is a quote from. It wasn't the head of the Harvard Business School, but it was someone of that ilk. And I didn't know about this. That the one set of businesses. When you read this, I just was like, there's an angry chapter in the book. Because as I was doing this thing on this stuff, I got all the information. I felt the same way this guy felt. The World Trade Center, the Pentagon attack. There are guys immediately realizing the stock market's going down, which it did. It's going to go up because there'll be a recovery. Quickly, let's write options at the new prices. I mean, and this is a business professor leader. Sleaze, is that all this is about? And then the last one. This is business press, and I think so. They may use the word disparity. They may be. Whatever it is, they know there's something has not gone right with our capitalist system. If this is the nature of it, yes, so I said Mother Jones, dollars and cents, the IWW. No, I was the editor of the Harvard Business Review. Was the guy. Was the third one. So these are, and one was the Wall Street Journal. He said, God Almighty, the Wall Street Journal. Well, it's reporters at the Wall Street Journal who tend to be not exactly the editorial page guys. Fortune, Forbes, and that's where the quotes came from. So the notion that this inequality and something isn't right with our capitalist system, it isn't a you have to be some left character, I think, to appreciate that. Yeah, this is not healthy for the country. Okay, now I want to just sort of stop and just say, okay, we've got a problem, I think, in the way the income distribution is developed, where the rest of the things have worked out pretty well. So part of the issue is going to be, can you change some of the income distribution? Can you have more unions or union-like organizations that workers feel they want without destroying or harming the successes of the economy? That's the kind of choice in our country. We also face, I'd like to hear stressed, we're living in an incredibly different world. So a set of chapters in the book about this new world where I don't think policy people their head was not in this new world. Now, let me be very explicit. Part of the ballyhoo about the U.S. economy came from the OECD. And we did once have, not so long ago, a Washington consensus view of the world. Both of those views were based, I think, on 1980s kind of phenomenon. And the Washington consensus, now the World Bank has officially declared that they never really did believe in it. And the IMF last year declared they never really believed in it. That's good to know. And the OECD has been backpedaling like crazy about that if you just do flexibility and have more inequality, which is part of their flexibility thing, that's going to solve all your problems. Because the evidence just came out. I mean, and so those organizations, they may have started off incredibly ideological, and the evidence, and I think actually, I know the OECD well enough, though, young economists kept going to the senior people and saying, we're not finding what we're saying. And there's an honesty in an organization, and eventually it comes out. And the IMF has been very fast within the last year or two. I've been very stunned. I don't quite know what the internal logic of that was. But suddenly they have just done a huge flip. So this is what I think the problems the country faces in this new thing. One, and why are workers having troubles in our country? Well, the global workforce got twice as big. The minute China and India joined the global workforce, we had twice, and the ex-Soviet, but it's smaller, we had twice as many people. These guys brought no capital. I mean, the Russians, they were good at bomb building or something, missiles. The China was a complete disaster case. Mao had, done horrors to the country, and India was just a very inward-looking and very inefficient. There was almost no, and they're very poor. There's no capital. So we suddenly have twice as many workers in the world, and more or less the same. Well, the capital's been growing, thank goodness, but it was you had a real halving of the capital-labor ratio because now companies suddenly can put all their investments overseas with a lot of workers. That's what they're doing. And that, of course, shifts power to our business. We were told as part of the NAFTA debate, don't worry with Mexico, because the Mexicans, they're all going to do the stupid jobs, and we're just going to get university degrees and so on, and we'll do all the good jobs. The word human resource leapfrogging is that, no, developing countries, China, India, including Mexico, are putting out college graduates like crazy. There are huge growth of this. The idea that we're the only smart guys in the world, or the only people capable of having university education. The leapfrogging is what they're doing is, they're jumping much quicker. If you go back in history and say, well, how long did it take us to build up our higher education system? The land grant college, and then we had the GI Bill. They're just doing what they're doing elsewhere, which they should be doing. It's just jumping as fast as they can. And so they've got a lot of university education. Our multinationals, there was a woman this morning speaking here from IBM, and she described what you all heard, the global sourcing strategy. IBM does not care about, I don't want to phrase this that sounds negative, because, but I'll phrase it, it'll sound however it is to you. IBM does not care one iota about this country. IBM, every strategy, they're a global company where they can get the best workers, they will source for the workers, where they can locate their plants in the cheapest labor that can do the work, that's where they'll locate. And IBM is no different. IBM is very explicit about this. The president made a very powerful statement about this a number of years ago. And I forgot whether I quoted him in the book. I probably did. And that's true of every single multinational company. Everyone has to have that in your head. These are and they're doing it. It's very good they're doing this. At some level, they're bringing modern technology, good jobs to India, China, or wherever it is. And as I said, they're spreading the modern technology. So trade is part of the trade is them sending back things that they make in India or China to the U.S. I mean, they are part of our trade imbalance in a deep sense. The offshoring, they're part of that, obviously. And the immigration is another aspect. That's not part of them, but that is part of people getting university degrees elsewhere. They want to come to our country and work because we are still the wealthiest, et cetera. This, I said here, this greater supply competition. And the important thing is that the balance from this it's shifted in favor of business. I use the word capital here. There was one group that told me, don't get a business group, don't use the word capital. It sounds like, I said, well, what's wrong with capital? We talk over capitalist economy. No, blatantly Marxist. So use the word business. I didn't change this here. It's only one session. But it just gets to be more difficult for market forces to help workers. I think American workers really do appreciate that. A lot of this fear of, with full employment, workers seem to be afraid of losing their jobs. It's because they do know that there's somebody elsewhere in the world at lower wages who has been educated and has been brought you the most modern technology by our companies and can do the work. It doesn't mean that they will locate there. It doesn't mean but I use the word difficult. I didn't say we're not. I don't want to be overly negative. So I'm sure we can things. So that's the world. And so this is the question. Nice little graphs here. Look at the. That's pretty cool. Because I think this is the kind of issue. So I think I'll give you some policy thoughts, and you'll tell me what your thoughts are. I think we can do better without killing off the American things, but I don't think we can do better without actually reducing the income or the growth of income of the super rich. And if we think that what we're going to do is be able to improve the living standards of the average American without taking, I was very careful here, reducing income or the growth of income. If the super rich just don't have if they just have a reasonable growth of income over the next 20 years, there will be a lot of money for the average person. And that's the stunning thing from the basic income distribution stuff. Okay. And then I mean, the basic, let me just put it this way. The basic reason, and then it's a little more busy table about markets and so on. Let me just one just factual comment. The basic reason why productivity and real wages have not kept up is because the gain in productivity has gone to the upper 1%, 1/10 of 1%. That's the reason, period. And they have done extremely well. There is a wonderful gentleman who's run the best hedge fund in the world, who's also a great mathematician, or was. He founded the Stony Brook, one of the great places, James Simon. And he makes about $2 billion a year in earnings. He spends it, he doesn't give it all away. Bill Gates give a lot of his wealth away. But he does wonderful things with his money, and I don't want to say anything bad against him. He's a good guy in many, many ways, and he did what I certainly couldn't do. He written important mathematical theorems. But $2 billion a year is a pretty hefty amount to make, and I'm sure there was a higher tax on him, and he would still live well. Yeah, there's a cut.
No, I was just wondering, how do you define super rich?
I want to, when we ask if anyone will speak up, because we do just have a few mics, we don't have mics circulating, so please go back to your question and
I think I sort of answered
project.
but
Yeah, well, I left it a little vague because in the book there's a thing about it's the upper 1%, and then what you find out is like 90% of the increase in the upper 1% went to the upper 1/10 of 1%. There's some these are people using income tax data, because you can't get this from the standard labor force. They don't ask those kind of numbers. But when people have gotten to look at the income tax things, so you can, it's almost like fractal. You can keep cutting it. You say, among the upper 1/10 of 1%, it'll turn out most of it will have gone to. Yeah, it just keeps going. So it really is super rich. And then if you want to include, make it the upper 1%, you can make it. I leave that to choice. So so now I wanted to address the kind of issue of we've been this great market economy. That's what all the pressure and the sales pitch has been. Well, I want to talk about the real markets and the models we have. And that gets back to the first thing we saw earlier with the Americans with exactly the same literacy scores, having bigger inequality of wages than everybody in Germany. or everybody in Sweden or the Netherlands. Real markets do seem to generate really a lot of inequality, dispersion. Now it's not a loaded, it's dispersion means variation, inequality pay among observationally equivalent workers. So you can get people of the same age, the same gender, the same schooling, the same test score or some test, and markets do seem to generate a lot of dispersion. That's could be that one person works harder. We don't know quite. One person is lucky. You happen to be the person. Gambling also generates a lot of dispersion. There's somebody who wins, and there's the losers. So there's a bunch of things about that. What the important thing I think to read into that is why the Europeans have much less inequality than we have. It's because they're interfering with the market. And that's what bothers some economists. They're interfering. And if you believe that this high dispersion of pay, that the U.S. should have the 84th, away from the most equal in the world, and be below most developing countries in inequality, that's necessary for the country to have prosperity, then you'll oppose whatever I say. Or you could believe, we could squeeze that a bit and not have this massive things. There's some interesting things that employment and wage changes in the U.S. in particular don't seem to be consistent with what we would anticipate in a market economy would happen. Let me give we were told, and correctly, but it was Bob Sowell, I think, wrote this as part of President Kennedy's Council of Economic famous advisors report, which said, look, an industry that has a lot of profits or a lot of productivity growth, the workers in that industry should not get wealthy, nor should the management. The employment should grow in that industry, and the productivity growth should be spread to all of us through price declines. We don't want the great productivity growth. The U.S. is the only advanced country where we see a very significant correlation, and we don't see the employment going up. And you can go look out and say, well, who's the most productive, the industries, et cetera. That you'll find them treating their workers well in wages, which this model says you shouldn't. But they do, and I don't want to, And so there's inconsistencies. I took the backdating of stock options as just that cannot be a competitive market operating. Something is very peculiar. That shareholders are obviously getting upset, but for a long time you just backdate your options, and so that just I said seemingly excessive. So one of my Chicago friends said, no, that's absolutely incorrect. That this is just a tax efficient way to reward the executives for their good work. And in the book, I have some statements about this, saying this guy got $100 million, and the company's share price went to pieces, and you sort of sit there, well, what did they do? Well, they backdated some of the stock options. So, the real markets are imperfect, they have to be washed. And then even the stock market goes weird sometimes. Well, we know the stock market goes crazy. And you start thinking, if you didn't have a regulated stock market, where you would be. You'd be back into the days of the robber barons when the stock market, everything was phony and they were running things. And nobody in the financial markets would say, let's have complete deregulation. The only market that they pushed this significant deregulation is the labor market. And I sit there and say, the financial market probably should work better than the labor market. Labor market's got fallible people in it, a lot of different interests. Financial market, all they're concerned about is money. They've now got all these super mathematicians working with computers to do stuff. And we know that one goes crazy. It just went through some craziness. And God knows whether it'll be up or down in the next year in some runs. Then I say our models, the economists' models are imperfect. So and the biggest thing is we have a lot of evidence now that people care deeply about fairness. Economists are amoral in some deep sense. We would fairness. Sociologists talk about that. We don't talk about that. And there's an element of truth to that, and so on. But we've now had any number of studies that just make it very clear people behave incredibly differently when they feel they're unfairly treated than when they're fairly treated. They won't be as productive. Most business people won't agree with that. So good business leaders are always trying to treat the workers fairly. The kind of experiments we have, let me just, people know this, it's a wonderful, it's called ultimatum game experiment. It's very simple. I take my hat off. I put in two little things, one of which says $100 and one of which says 0. And I ask you to pick one. And what I'm going to do is this. You get to keep. You see, you picked $100 for the moment. Okay, I was going to have him do the other picking. One of you is going to pick a 0, one's going to be $100. And the only catch is this. You can go and cash it in at the Wilson Center. I'm not going to pay it.
We'll take care of that.
Yeah. If you got the 100, if he approves. So what do you can offer him something. So the question is, how much do you offer him? So he approves. What would you do?
You'd offer him 50%.
50%. Okay, that's the normal.
It's a win-win.
That's a normal human fair thing. Sometimes you might have thought you were hesitating there. Yeah, oh, 40. He might take 40, and you get down around 30, and there's a fair chance he'll take it. But there's a little more risk because he might. The economics model says, well, how much should you offer him? Penny. Yeah, 1 penny. And
Does he get a chance to make a counteroffer?
no, she just makes the offer. He says yes or no. So there's no bargaining. We can have games with bargaining as well too. I mean, but
Because if you have bargaining, the guy that gets nothing has complete control, and it's going to
That's
extract
correct.
about 95% of the value.
except there she could say I'm not going to cash in the ticket.
Fine, so you both,
But that's right. You both
Yeah,
can.
back to the prisoner
That's the
dilemma.
worst. That's right. You're okay. You know. You're. But they now have brain scans in people's heads when they're doing these decisions. So when she offered him a penny, there's a part of his brain that's regarded as emotional or whatever it is. It's not the mathematical calculative part. Would go off. She's insulted me. She's being unfair to me. And it lights up like crazy. Science has had a number of articles on this. It lights up. And so we understand that the desire to be treated fairly is built into us. It isn't some extra thing you attach as moralistic or whatever you want it to be. It's built in there. So we know that the models in economics that don't deal with fairness are seriously missing something. And once you do the 50-50, pretty much everybody's happy. Now think about workers and CEOs and the division of the pie for some things. All these experiments just tell us that, gee, you could probably do better if you had a little more fair, a little more, I'm not pushing, extreme, a little fairer. Everybody appreciates, I think, if there's one person who is truly contributing more to the production of the whole team, we probably think it's fair that person gets more than the rest of us, because that person is doing the yeoman job, etc. We might even regard it as unfair if that person were getting less than getting the same as me, but they are doing much better things than me. And then just at the bottom is it property rights to worker as well as capital. One of the things conservatives have correctly said, and it was part of the Washington Consensus and everything else, is you've got to have protection of property. Because capitalism needs protection, needs property, needs some form of private property. The Chinese, it's always been a little unclear exactly with the party and with the local governments, so it's a little messy there. But they certainly are moving to more private ownership and private things, and they just and I just said property rights to workers as well as capital. What's fascinating about and I started with the slide from the Fraser Institute. I showed you their ranking of the labor. Why? The country that's the worst in their world in labor is Germany. Sweden is usually second worst in their labor index, the least free. Why? Because they have extensive labor laws that protect the rights of workers. Property rights to workers. I treat that as equal. Capital needs to be protected, but so too workers. And so I put it, and this seems to be just straight economics, and I don't understand how the ideology got that only one side of the thing needs the protection of the law. It doesn't make sense. Infrastructure, and then we have this big thing. I think that countries, the only way we can't compete in low-wage production with China, India, and we live on what is a public good, knowledge. And if you know what's going on in the science area, it's more and more teamwork. It's more and more people, the big teams do the major science advances. It's not, I don't know, maybe there is some Albert Einstein still here all along, doing something. But generally, the Human Genome Project, you just see huge teams of people doing this stuff. And the companies need that public knowledge created, and so on. So I phrase it, the strong conservative view of you run an economy with very little protection for certain things, and you just trust the markets completely. Well, the markets are imperfect, the models of the markets are imperfect, and we're seeing more and more of this movement towards intellectual property, which is a problem. This is my view of where we sit. And we've done experiments. There's a chapter in the book which actually goes through the exact experiments we did this. So we offered people different levels of inequality, different payments for doing some things in particular settings. And what we found out that it's an inverse U, meaning you can't have too little inequality to produce the most output. And I think of Sweden. I was a very conservative guy in Sweden. Some of the union guys have been very uneasy about me. But I just said Sweden could use a little more inequality because you got a lot, and you can. The Americans, I think, to the right of this curve, and I can't prove that. My Chicago friends have yelled at me for saying that. They're happy when I said Sweden doesn't have enough, but they're very unhappy. So the I star is the optimizing point of inequality. The inequality creates incentives for people, and it leads us to try harder. We want to have races, we want to do things, and we need a certain amount. And then it can get too far. And it gets
the Freeman answer to the Laffer curve?
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It's got to be that famous. I would be very happy. Although, as you know, economists don't think very much of our class. And so I don't know if I'd want to make the trade-off of people who would say, oh, another joke curve that makes no sense. We have in the book this chapter, experiment that we actually did to show that this, at least in one laboratory experiment where people were producing something, that we could have too much and too little. I called F the fair point because most surveys show that whatever the level of inequality is in the country, and this is where I'm at odds with the Swedes, everybody wants to have a little less inequality. So, so there's a sense of people are willing to do some sacrifice and go down, and that makes sense up to a point. And there we are. In any case, I'd forgotten, to be honest. I could have put U.S. and then I got yelled at by Chicago for nodding. But I actually don't remember.
Can I ask a question?
Read the book.
What's the difference?
Speak a little loudly so the microphone will pick you up.
What's the difference between inequality and distribution of income?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've used various words for it. It is the distribution. Well, this is not distribution of income. This is distribution of earnings for people working. Because we could also have some distribution of income, which goes to people who do not work at all. And, that most economic analysis would say that's probably going to reduce the effort of all the people who do work. And that's why we have, and the Swedes, it's very interesting, both have a very much of a welfare state that is closer to workfare. And that's what the welfare reform that we passed. Those women are working now, way beyond what anybody thought. That's one of the chapters, things I said. The right-wing guys, they were right about that. The women aren't doing any better. Their income isn't high. The welfare moms who are now doing, out there, but they're actually making about the same that they were making before, and they're working, and that that most people, including themselves, that they regard that as better than getting checks. So workfare meaning that what you do is if you're working, earned income tax credit is the greatest thing we have on that. You say you're working, you're not making that much money, we will give you more money, but we're not going to give you that much money if you're not working. And then it's, of course, incumbent in the society to provide full employment, which is an issue. Okay, so now I'll get to my policies. There's solutions to the world. So I first tell you, I don't know, I haven't got the computerized models that are, simulating these things. You can do that with some guys. And then I just say, yeah, all this. But I'm going to go with this basic thing. If we have a choice between something that makes Warren Buffett wealthier or the average American wealthier, we will go with what Warren Buffett wants, which is to make the average American wealthier. That was his explicit statement. And we've had more and more of these hugely wealthy people saying, I don't need another tax cut from, I'm willing to pay, I think 5% they've been saying, 5% higher taxes. Maybe we want to give 10% of those to pay 5%, but, so that the money can go for general well-being of normal people. It's just very interesting the way some of the super wealthy have really, and then I say, there's some outcomes are related in ways that are connected. The book is a discussion of the more inequality you have, the more you generate people working lots of hours, because that's a huge incentive. I want to be on the upper side of the inequality, not on the lower. In Germany, you don't work that much. If you lose your job, your earnings your living standard doesn't change that much. And so, you can lose some work ethic that we as a country like. Okay. And this is my old mentor, John Dunlop, and if he was here, he would have ripped up and said, you can't do this. There he is. Because he said it's insulting to Washington for people really worked at writing policies to stick at the last chapter of some academic book a set of policy things that are not, and I'm very conscious of that. So with this are ideas or suggestions for things to think about. And I realized that if one really wanted to do this, you would need a lot of simulations. You'd really want to verify what numbers would say the policy's going to work, and so on and so forth. You have to talk to a lot of people. So this is not meant in that guise. It's meant in this other ways. So I call this, take this, my Chicago friends, 9 ways to help the invisible hands. Both of them. So some of these things, I've gotten a lot of, what's the right word? I've developed some of them more depthfully. And I know a lot of people in the business community like some of them. Some of them they don't. So the idea that we have to do more R&D, give fellowships to young people, we can't be we can't be competing in the low-level stuff. And I think everybody knows anything about the NIH and the NSF knows the young scientists are not getting grants. They're going to 55 to 60-year-old guys. And so I say here, gee, it just seems natural. Can't possibly be that the 25, 30-year-old scientists. And, Heisenberg was 25 when he did the uncertainty principle. The Einstein that you think about was a useless old man. In terms of science, it's the young Einstein that 30-something or other who had all the great ideas in the third period. I have gray hair. I'm going to watch myself. But so there's a set of things you just would want to do. This I already said to you. I think the great success in the country has been EITC for making work pay for people. Originally a Republican plan. That was meant to undercut the minimum wage. And then for unknown reasons, the Republican Party decided it's not a good idea, that the only people who need EITC are the billionaires to this. I'm favorable to the increase in the minimum wage. I really like the way we've been doing it. Not federal government, for the states. Because that means that the state of Minnesota and the state of California can, by their state minimums, 2/3 of American workers are paid above the federal minimum. Federal minimum has become sort of irrelevant for most workers in the country. And I think that's actually pretty good, in the sense that the states should be allowed the freedom when they want to help their workers and they feel it's not going to be harmful in any way to go do that. That's the public goods, I think. I think national health insurance stuff, you learn that. Infrastructure, all of these things, market enhancing investments, and the question just is somebody's got to pay for some of them. If it's an R&D tax credit for the companies, well, somebody's got to pay the tax, and they get the money, and so all these things here you have to put dollars to. Here's a set of things that I'm quite favorable to. We have today in the U.S., there's a chapter in the book that deals with that. 40% of workers are being paid either profit-sharing, employee ownership, or parts of a company where all the workers get a stock option. 40% of Americans are in variable pay systems that ties them to the companies. And I just think the companies where that works are companies that also share decision-making with the workers. So those tend to be the high-tech companies usually, where you can't, you gotta let the workers make, the employees make the decisions. So I came out and said I think that we should be pushing this as hard as we can, and we should be publicizing the stuff. Maybe more tax breaks for this, but I didn't exactly say that's going to be looked at and so on. And then the more controversial things, which are, oh, look at that. My God. They're there, and they're workers, they're people. I think given what we've seen about the unions, the workers' desire for the unions, and we don't have to care at all about the AFL-CIO, Rob Blacko, not here today, but he has to care because he's an employer, but the rest of us could, it's what the workers want in the country. And they're telling us they want some representation, they want something, so I think we should just widen the span of what they can choose. In the AFL-CIO is very against getting rid of 8A2, which is the restriction that says companies can't set up company-type unions. I'm in favor of that because it should give let company wants to do that, fine. If it turns out to be a total bogus bad thing, I trust the American workers and the AFL-CIO and the unions will get there and they'll put their gun at that company's head. So I hear just a list of things, and so what I'm concerned about is if you accept the notion that because of the China, the India and Russia, and this imbalance between capital and labor that we're going to have for many years, all you got to do is strengthen the ability of labor to take care of themselves, as opposed to having government to do things. And that's what the American workers want. They want their own ability to do stuff, and then have them own capital. And that's part of the shared capital business. Our pension funds are very important, in the process. They are workers' capital, and we're in the CalPERS and these things have been very outspoken, etc. And then I'm in favor of all kinds of state experiments with labor laws, so that we can figure out what the best thing is, similar to what we do with the minimum wage. The states can do their own choice. Just a footnote: the current administration has been the most anti-states' rights administration we've ever had in the history of the country. The extent to which they have tried to remove the ability of states and governors, and I think particularly they would love to not have Governor Schwarzenegger do the things that he's trying to do. And I would say they were against the Mr. Romney's thing, but when he did it when he was governor of Massachusetts, but I believe he's declared he never was governor of Massachusetts. So that is the pension fund things. I think that the fact that we own a lot of our capital, and a lot of that capital we control, I say we as the workers, so on, all of us as employees, but a lot of it is not controlled. The ESOPs where the workers don't vote, they don't control any stuff. So you have a tax advantaged thing for worker ownership, employee stock ownership plan, and the workers do not control the votes on that. It's just unbelievable in some level. And that's correct. Well, it depends. Some pension funds, there are yeah. But you're right. Lots and lots of the majority of pension funds. That's correct. And then I have my really radical scheme here. Two radical schemes. You give tax breaks, stock options, where the companies can only if all workers are given the same treatment. So you're going to have a stock option plan. Now that sounds crazy, but the only reason our major corporations, as far as I can see, provide health care for all of their workers and have pension plans for all of their workers was because back in 1948 or something, back when Harry Truman was around, they were told they could only take that as a tax deduction off their profits if it was given to all the workers. And I know at my university, they went running around to find, because we get some tax breaks for putting our kids through the daycare center, but the way the law is written, the tax thing is, or the way Harvard, you got to have a certain fraction of lower paid people as part of it. And so, wonderful, the university runs around and makes sure some workers, buildings and grounds and whatever they are, that their kids are going to the same daycare as the professors and the administrators, because otherwise we wouldn't do it. I know we would not. I can't believe these companies would. So I thought the options. Okay, the options are very good. Incentive for people, fine, but let's make sure everybody. What has happened post the collapse of the end of the .com and some of the stock option things, what companies have been doing is cutting back the options for other work for lower pay. The ones that had all employee stock options, now that there's a squeeze on, those guys are lost out. The executives have cut themselves. And then I think people on boards of directors of companies should be certified. I'm not saying licensed, but there should be a certification that just says you know how to read the books of the company. You've read certain things about the standards, and you have some understanding of what your responsibility is, fiduciary responsibilities that we do for people on pension boards. This is not help Harvard, because Harvard has no courses. The Stanford turns out does have some courses for people on boards. You get a certificate or something. I don't know what you get. There's no legal requirement. But people should not be allowed to have their friends and relatives on boards who can't read the statistics, who don't bother reading the things. I mean, part of the backdating of options. And could you imagine being on a board where you find the executives right after 9/11 are writing options to themselves at the new low price because there was a panic? What sort of? Well, it's somebody who's doing the same thing in his company, or it just. But if you had some sort of certification of these guys, again, the certification is not the same as licensing, so my board is all filled with people who are not certified friends of mine. That's a great signal to shareholders. And then his board is filled with people who've certified, who went through whatever the Stanford course or whatever it happened to, whatever we want to do. And more companies are doing this. It's just good companies are doing this, and some other guys, they'll wait till they get more money out before somebody screams. So these are not very radical solutions in that sense, but that's. Oh, then I said some people may get angry with my suggestions. So I looked for angry faces on the web. I did get some, and then I just conclude by if you just accepted a very successful economy and productivity growth and all these good things, and full employment, and failing utterly on income distribution, one of the worst in the world. Well, so what's your solution to the thing? And I quoted a great mathematician there. Because I recognize I haven't done the things I suggest in my 9 little things. Maybe some of them won't work. Maybe somebody will come in and say, "Oh, this will happen there." That's worth. But you shouldn't just. That's what the business community has done, and they just did it at Harvard. So this Chamber of Commerce guy just begged me on. Okay, you don't like these suggestions. Come on, there's a problem. Tell us how you're going to solve it. And you have this fear that they won't solve it, they won't come to them until somehow there are riots in the streets or something, or somebody's, or there's some government, thing that just is horrendous, and then they'll say, "Oh, wait a minute, we can take care of this problem." So this is saying it's not right just to say no, unless you want to say, "I love I want our country to get the most unequal in the world. I want our country to to have et cetera, because that's been the direction." Oh, that's my hat. Okay, so that's the book.
We've had some questions along the way, so we've run a little later. I know some of you have to go. We promised to have people out by 1:30. But can you stay for a few questions?
Yeah,
let's have some questions and alternative suggestions. Mac Dessler with some new policies here.
These aren't new, but I notice in your prescriptions you don't, and I think in your analysis, you do not focus on what a lot of people in Washington are focusing on now, which is disruptions, displacement, job insecurity.
Right.
Is
Wage
that
insurance.
Yeah, wage insurance. Is that because you basically feel that problem is overemphasized relative to inequality in general, or just because lots of other people are doing that and you're doing something else?
Mixture of the two. I probably have wage insurance mentioned, saying it's
You do actually in conjunction with the EITC.
Yeah, the
Okay,
EITC.
it's not highlight. It's not
No,
prominent. Yeah.
because other people have it. It's, and then I suppose I feel much more comfortable talking about the inequality, the long-term things,
Yeah.
as opposed to as you say, the disruptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have this, very limited unemployment insurance system. But whenever we get into a big recession, the states quickly expanded.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, you adjust to that, but you're not cutting at the long-standing rules that run the economy. Almost, let me just say, I forgot what I said exactly there about EFCA, which is the Washington, the union solution, the Employee Free Choice Act. I think that will do zero, virtually zero, and I think that's a backward-looking thing for the unions, and unfortunately, that's why it's not here anymore. I said this group, union group, and most of the union people afterwards will say, yeah, that's right.
Why is it backward?
If you sort of say, okay, now we're going to have card checks instead of elections.
Yeah, right.
Your best estimate would be maybe you get another 1% of the workforce might be unionized.
Yeah.
And maybe not even that. Let's say it's give 1% more. You're now in the private sector, you're at 7%. So you have 8%.
Okay.
You got to think about the 92% or 3% of the workers who are not covered by collective bargaining, unlikely to be covered by collective bargaining. They're telling you, some of them saying they want unions. They're happy to join this new AFL-CIO group. They're members of professional associations. In these surveys, they're telling you they'd like some representation, some greater independence at their workplace, where they can speak to the employers on positive things. And good companies have those things. I mean, so it just it's like your disruption. It is. It's the elections are. So, the elections. The employers have a lot of say about what goes on in those elections. They bring in high-powered consultants and they really press workers. Okay, so you'll reduce that a certain amount. You'll get a few more union victories. I don't see that solving things.
Corny?
Two questions or comments, if I may. One is if a worker's pensions are entirely invested in the stock of his company, then he is in big trouble. Second comment. Early on, you cited the statistical series on the earnings of production non-supervisory workers.
Right.
BLS is going to phase out that series, and so they say. They don't want to collect it anymore. They say employers cannot make those distinctions. And they expect it to disappear by the year 2010.
Well, I mean, sometimes BLS is usually a pretty good professional organization. And so as long as they did the following, they gave us, and if they don't, we'll have to do it by hand, but much better BLS did it nicely. It gave us a match over, a link. So we don't lose the history. So you would have to give us an adjustment factor. Because if they're going to go, I mean, I know a lot of BLS surveys, and they have some great employer-based surveys that they do that probably, I would agree, probably better than that one, which is an old historic one. So the only thing you would want them to do is to give you a good period where where they have both surveys on the same firms, and so we could get a nice link. That's all. And the first thing, you're absolutely right. You absolutely don't want people in your pension funds. Pension funds should be invested broadly. That's where the ESOPs get to be a bit dangerous. On the other hand, to give incentives to people, you want profit sharing, and you want them to own something in their own company, so they care about that. And then there's just a very interesting balancing act. The Germans are going to pass a new law for employee share ownership. I say they're going to. They're in the middle of discussions, and this is exactly the heart of the issue. The left, the German Social Democrats, want people to get shares in all German companies. So there'll be some mutual fund set up, and as part of your pay, you will get shares in this. And they have some deal with a lot of Germany's, a lot of small companies, with something they call silent partnerships. So there's some way even the small companies are going to be, even though they don't have shares on the stock market, we've run into this. The conservative, Mrs. Merkel's party, wants to do it as your own company. And I'm sure, since they're a grand coalition, it'll be some division, and which will deal a bit with your problem, but we'll also deal with the incentive problem. You can see why the difference. So, you don't want to be like the Enron workers at all.
Corning, I neglected to ask you to introduce yourself.
I'm Cornelia Strasser. I used to work for the House Budget Committee, and I'm now editing a book of economic statistics in my return.
To go to you and then Tom.
Thanks.
Please introduce yourself, please.
Ken Ryder, I'm with the National Academy of Public Administration. Two questions. One, you suggest with the need to reinvest in R&D, there's some role for human capital. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that. And then secondly, particularly with respect to the stability that may exist among the various quartiles and quintiles of the income distribution. If you posit that there's upward mobility or downward mobility, that's a very different picture than if it's very stable, and it has something to say about the role of human capital, I suspect.
Yeah. And there's some, you'll find in the book that's covered someplace. Because there've been a lot of studies now with that. And the U.S. has, if you just do it comparatively, the U.S. has no more upward or downward mobility than anybody else. Somewhat, possibly even somewhat less. It does mean that these measures of inequality for all the countries are overstated, because you're going to get the young person counted and the older person, the person who's just invested in the school. And so the best one could tell, all of the countries, some of that inequality is you want. I mean, and that's so. I'm going to argue with that, and it's just the U.S. is just off the map in some other aspects of the inequality, not on the human capital thing. Yeah, I have a very explicit proposal, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, which was done for the Brookings for the Hamilton Project, and that's where it's very narrow, evidence-based. I have very careful analyses of NSF data, and it's as if we want to encourage more people going into science and engineering, which they want to do. What we've done inadvertently is we give 1,000 NSF fellowships, national fellowships. We gave 1,000 in 1960, when the undergraduate population was a third from this now. So inadvertently, by not increasing that number, we actually have been sending a signal to young people: don't do science and engineering. there are all kinds of problems. That's why the very first thing I said about changing the young position, the young, if you were to follow with a proposal like that, and vaguely that's gotten into some of the policy discourse. It doesn't cost that much, and you're able to pull the number out of a hat by saying, let's just bring it back to what it was in the 1960s. No one planned to discourage people by keeping the 1,000. You would have a lot more PhDs coming out in science engineering. And then the question is, gee, could they get good jobs? And I'm especially, evil-minded or something, to say, okay, they're going to create some pressures on the system. And I bet you then we'll see NIH suddenly say, oh, we got to give more grants to young people. And I bet you, because they're aware of this problem, they need a little bit of a gun at their head. So you got 3,000 instead of 1,000. 3,000 NSF guys graduating with super work. Do we want the headlines to be saying, can't get good jobs, have to work in old professors' labs, as I think then we would actually see a bit of a pressure on that. That in itself is not a full, it's also another aspect. Federal government R&D has fallen as share of GDP. The R&D share of GDP of every other country, major country, has gone up. Government. Our industry has done great with R&D. We lead the world in sort of industry R&D. Share of GDP, but not this.
This is the two-handed intervention.
Yeah, I just
Please introduce yourself.
Ellis Motter. I'm a former fellow here, and but anyway, I'm talking in a different role at the moment. But I just want to follow up what you said, because I just heard a great speech this morning by a person who has a good shot at being able to implement some of these things. And Hillary Clinton proposed this morning, first of all, to tremendously increase the number of scientists and engineers. Secondly, to totally increase the fellowships at NSF that you were just talking about. Thirdly, to increase the R&D budgets of NIH and NSF and everything to create the demand, so that as they're coming out. So everything you just said, she just actually very explicitly and strongly proposed as something she would do if she became president.
Do you have a candidate you're supporting?
Yeah. What's interesting is that, because I wrote this paper for this Hamilton project. In principle, it's Brookings and it's not partisan. I appreciated when I wrote this paper and so on, that it actually was semi-partisan. Although, I'm sure the Republicans could easily endorse it as well. It wouldn't be, and that's great. That is very good. I think it's got to be both sides. The argument's got to go up.
Yeah.
There's got to be jobs for these people. And then the tough part, though, is going to be to get the money out of the hands of the senior people into the hands of the younger people.
Well, she made a big point about how it's so important to get the young people to get more stuff, because of that very point you were making. So.
Yes, well, that's great. You made part of my day.
Just as I'm old enough to, you're going to take it away. Tom and then Lynn.
My name is Tom Hungerford. I'm with Congressional Research Systems.
Speak a little louder so that...
Oh, sorry. I guess I have three comments, and one was, you already asked about the mobility, but I'll say something. One is on your slide with Mother Jones in dollars and cents. It's not spelled cents as in dollars and cents. It's spelled cents as S-E-N-S-E.
Oh.
And then I guess with
thanks.
And as far as mobility, I'm glad you have a footnote in there, since that's what a lot of conservatives say. Is there's a lot of mobility within the earnings distribution or the income distribution. I guess what I've been very surprised at is there isn't all that much mobility within the earnings, or what little there is, it's not very far. And that's both in earnings. I guess there's been some research finding that earnings mobility among young folks has been falling.
There is a lot. So that you might.
There's a lot, but it's not far.
That's correct. And I think the surprise to a lot of people has been is the Europeans have produced various you do exactly the same thing with U.S. data you do with European data. I'll just be very modest about it and just say we're no better than they are. And there's some potential that they're better than us. Now, they've been very cautious in the way they say it. So I would just say, and there's no evidence, let me put it a different way, another way of thinking about this. The income inequality in the U.S. has gone up over the last 30 years or so, off. With Democrats as well as Republicans, so it's not a partisan. It's a fact, that's all. It's a fact that occurred in both parties. And there's no evidence that there's been any increase in mobility over the last 30 years. So
yeah, I agree. The other thing is, even if you have the same amount of mobility in Europe and the U.S., they don't have all that much far to move because the income distribution is so much more compressed.
Absolutely right.
And then I guess one other point I just want to getting into the policy thing. I guess one thing you could end up trying is something that Ben Body has said. Sometimes the invisible hand, or in your case, hands, is nowhere to be seen. And then start talking about policy. But in comparing the U.S. and Europe, is one of the things that I'm struck about Europe is that I guess people's ideas, maybe it's just their culture, is so much different in the U.S. that they have different expectations about themselves and what the government can and should provide. And so I guess I'm always want to come up with nice policy ideas. I'm just wondering, is the U.S. ready for that? Or even if we did go with some of these policy ideas, would it have an appreciable effect on, say, on income inequality or earnings inequality?
Well, I mean, I could phrase it this way. If we could just bring back the good old levels of inequality under Ronald Reagan, it would be a much more equal society. I mean, there clearly is there are big attitude differences, and that's why I said when I was in Sweden. At one point, I was denounced in one of the left-wing papers, social left-wing papers, as a cowboy economist trying to shoot down the Swedish model of equality. And no, we just wanted to say a little more inequality might be worth trying as an incentive for some people in some settings and so on. A lot of these things, I think, if you have to do them gradually. And I've been very encouraged by the number of really wealthy people who are saying, yes, they can see this as, et cetera. Now, if you strengthen the hands of workers through unions or whatever organizations, they'll take care of themselves. When I keep thinking of what would happen if we're paying 20% higher wages for workers. Well, you just know that they would squeeze, the CEO just wouldn't be getting quite as much money as as he or she is getting. And I don't think that runs so counter to the America, in the sense of just bringing us back in the income distribution sense 30 or 40 years. I don't think we should be thinking about going back to anything. I think that's the problem with this EFCA, the AFL-CIO position in some of these things. They want to bring back the old collective bargaining, and that's not going to happen, and it's very hard for it to happen. They've got to look more towards the future. I like these things of variable pay. Yeah, workers get some greater shares of the profits. Conditional that all their you have to balance those things out. That they don't have all their money tied up into one firm. I think there are a lot of progressive things that can reduce income inequality that fit with American sort of standards and values and the way we operate. But the bottom line is it's got to be that we're cutting. We are saying and honestly saying to the super wealthy, you're not getting what you got. I had one funny discussion with John Edwards about a year before he declared his presidency, and it's parts of the book, and I gave some of the stuff, and his first reaction, and I ended up by saying, but everything here means that you've got to tax and do things to the rich. They just they can't be getting what they've been getting, And he said, oh, that's really going to be bad. Like, you know, I got to get money for these guys, more or less. He didn't say exactly why, but it was just, he said, tell me more about those R&D tax credits that benefit everybody. And I did, but so not for me, but you know, in his health care plan and stuff, he clearly has, somewhere he's gotten this message to him. I assume he probably talked to any number of people, and everybody had to be saying to him the same thing. You know, if you don't address somewhat the income distribution, and you know, a reasonable way of addressing it is just to say to these people, you're not getting all of the growth of productivity over the next 20 years, which you got over the last 20 years. You're just going to get the same share as everybody else. You know, or you could go further than that. You could say you're going to get a smaller share, or you know, those seems to me are, you know, things you could do. And I don't see where it's going to reduce the incentives, which is the conservative view is you're going to kill off the incentives. They're all going to, I don't know, what are they going to do? Because these are hard-working, they're the business guys. They're hard-working, you know, they put in many hours. Unfortunately, they've found that you can, by cheating and being slightly dishonest, you can get lots of money. We want to remove that incentive from them. So they say, yeah, we want you to work hard, we want you to be well, but not with these backdating stock options, not this kind of stuff. There's a set of stuff that we want you, and you know, I don't think that's going to kill the golden goose at all.
I'm Diane Lynn, and I'm a union official at the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I'm curious as to what you think the trend in unions at federal government agencies will be over the next few years. And were you surprised that GAO voted to unionize after an 82, 84-year history of no unions?
No, I'm not. That reflects I think workers especially employers that disappeared for the moment. They didn't involve in any of the union or activities. I don't know what the federal government, but the federal government can, whatever they may have done, the supervisors, they could not do what private sector guys did. It would all be, even the Bush administration, people would not engage in the tactics. So I think this is indicative, throughout the country, people want unions, even with, the federal government is great because without collective bargaining, you don't bargain over wages. And the federal government is in total is what, 30 to 40% unionized, roughly speaking. And that fits with my vision of probably over the 50% that the latest polls show. That's probably what private sector workers, the fraction, would want as well. And this is where the trade unions are right. The reason they don't get it is because the employer basically goes in and just says, I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm bringing in these consultants. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm really playing tough, legal or illegal. And the private sector does that. And sometimes the employers refer to they get an NLRB if the posting, I fired somebody for union activity. Those are referred to as hunting licenses. I've talked to employers who say they love them. Says, if the workers didn't get the message that there's not going to be a union there, to see that you broke the law and to stop the union, that they get the message. But what really bothers the workers, my survey says, the workers, they want cooperative relations with the employer. You want to sit there and deal with the problems. You don't want to have an employer who's out to chop you to shreds. I mean, the FCAs, they're trying to get around some of that. I don't think that really is the effective strategy. So I assume there'll be more federal government. Remember, Ronald Reagan, when he fired the air traffic controllers for illegally breaking the law of the United States and conducting that strike, they tried to keep them from reunionizing. They tried to convince them legally. I mean, they didn't do anything horrible. And they voted to reunionize. So the air traffic control, within, what is it, 2 or 3, someone may know exactly, 2 or 3, at one point I knew, 2 or 3 years afterwards, they were union again. And I've always been very upset with people who say, oh, it was Reagan firing the guys that were disruptive unions. No, if you'd been a smart union movement, you would have said, 3 years later, we're union again. And that's because this kind of job is under such stress and such things. You desperately need a union. and lives are at stake. So here the union, by saying, no, you can't push us for another hour, or whatever the things they're doing about the workplace, probably is reducing accidents. And that message never came out when they reunionized. It was not national news. No, the AFL-CIO didn't know how to play that as saying, people need unions, and now this union will not illegally strike again, and go against the whatever, and the Reagan administration would dealt with them, and so on, and they just didn't know how to play that. I'll basically say one other comment, because there's a lot of things that they're very critical of the unions, because I think they've let us down by not being more creative and better, and we need them. Without them, there are no real powerful forces. The Enron people, the Enron non-union white-collar workers who lost everything got severance pay. They got, I've forgotten exactly, it maybe says it in the book, but I'll say $35 million severance pay. No one in the U.S. knew that the unions freely, the AFL-CIO sent their lawyers to court. They organized an email campaign to the bankruptcy judge so that these workers got severance pay. If you know anything about bankruptcy, the people in the bankrupt corporation who are at the bottom of the list of the creditors are the workers. They get nothing. And the judges, I've talked to the judge about this. I said, why? This is unfair. He says the key thing is, I appreciate the judge, is to get the company running again. The workers, if they get it running again, will have a job. But we can't do that until they get something in the end if we can get it running again. Now, you understand the logic. There is at least the judges aren't sitting there saying, screw the workers. This case, they actually reversed this. And the AFL-CIO did this, and no one in this country knew about this. I mean, unbelievable. I talked to union groups and say, does this happen? No. Why not? The AFL-CIO was worried that union members would say, why are you spending union money to get money to those non-union workers in Houston, Texas?
Oh, my God.
Yes. You just sit there and say, how could you not? And I asked them another question, and they did this, because I talked to some parts of the AFL-CIO very freely. Other parts, they don't like to hear me at all. I said, well, when these workers got their money, and they know they got it because you went out there, did you sign them up for an organization? They said, no, we don't have any organization to sign them up to because we can't do collective bargaining. Well, now they have this organization with the 2 million people, the Working American. That's part of why they set that organization up. The recognition that they could be doing good things for workers and have no place for those workers, and they're not going to have collective bargaining, they didn't have jobs, many of them. But at that moment I thought, that's the time to get them to sign the union card. Even if they're anti-union in their, in their politics and so on, that you just did them a big favor, they know that. And yet, I couldn't imagine those people not signing. And they said, no, we don't have any place for them to sign. And I just thought, oh my God. I talk to union groups a lot, union workers. I always say, don't the Enron, great thing the AFL-CIO did. Nobody knows. They were so afraid that somehow it was just totally out of touch. Because you talk to union people and they say, great, I don't mind that some of my dues went to help those guys who were anti-union people. Generally, Enron was not a union place. But there were workers who got really shafted to the wall, and we got them some money.